Many migrant workers in China got stuck in cities during coronavirus lockdowns. For more on the challenges they face, I'm joined by Dan Wang in Shanghai. She's the chief economist of Hang Seng Bank. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, have more migrant workers looked for opportunities closer to their hometowns in the pandemic? Has there been any kind of reverse migration?
Well, the reverse migration has started 2 years ago after the COVID first breakout in 2020. And we have seen a dramatic change in actually the migration pattern since then. Because in big cities like Beijing and Shanghai, the restrictive policies have been staying in place, and there is no sign that they will be lifted anytime soon. So many of those migrant workers went back to their home counties or rural areas because the locals have different kinds of supporting policies for them to do startups, and they're also waiting for opportunities. One day they might come back to the big city again.
Well, you're there in Shanghai. Many reports we've heard of migrant workers stuck in limbo during the lockdowns with nowhere to go. What have you experienced or seen with these workers, many of whom have been on the front lines as delivery drivers or health workers?
Well, for myself, the biggest hit would be the city services. Taxi drivers are, of course, hard to come by these days because many of them have returned to their hometown. And local workers now dominate the taxi drivers market. And I've been having this cleaning lady for my apartment, and she's not being able to come back to Shanghai for the longest time. So over time, I believe some of those workers might return, but it is highly unlikely that my cleaning lady can return to Shanghai anytime soon because the rental cost in Shanghai hasn't really declined. And it's becoming more difficult to live with all the restrictive measures.
Sure. Talk to us more about the impact of the lengthy lockdowns on migrant work. On one hand, they're needed for certain types of jobs, but on the other hand, as you mentioned, that work has dried up or ended because of the restrictions or lockdowns.
Well, for majority of Shanghai's manufacturing factories, they depend on migrant workers. And right now, as you can see, they are operating under this closed loop management scheme. And in the closed loop, that means workers have to stay on the job. They sleep on the factory site. The life condition has been quite difficult. So many decided to return to their hometown and wait for better opportunities. And now Shanghai has been giving more support for companies to retain their workers, but it also looks like the trend is quite obvious. Every company is trying to cut costs by laying off, or at least temporarily laying off some of their current workers, waiting for the economy to take up again. I think this process might be quite bumpy. Because another COVID wave might come back, and we might just be going back to some of the partial lockdown measures again.
And talk to us about what you're seeing. I know you told us about your personal story, but Shanghai, much of the city reopened on June 1st. It hasn't been quite that long, but how soon do you think we'll start to see things sort of moving and churning again, economy-wise?
Well, so far there has been some back and forth in the COVID control because most of the companies cannot run in full capacity, including my bank. People usually would take shift in their working schedules, and many of the office buildings are quite alert. If there are any potential COVID cases, they would close down the building. And when we walk in the street in Shanghai now, it looks like most of the shops are open, although you still can't dine in most of them. Some of the locations in the west side of Shanghai would open for customers, but restricted for lunchtime. And at night, after 8:30 p.m., usually no restaurants are open anymore. So I think it shows that Shanghai does have this new momentum of resuming its economic activities, but COVID control is still the top priority.